Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are gathered here virtually for St. Louis Poetry Center's awards presentation and reading for our Beverly Hopkins Memorial High School Poetry Contest. Normally, each year, we have this, we present these awards and winners at our annual poetry concert. But of course, due to the pandemic, we have not been able to gather in person. So this year, we are going to celebrate these fantastic poets with a virtual presentation. And we are happy to have all of you with us this afternoon. And also, if you're watching this later, thank you for watching. And please feel free to share it out with friends and family. Just a quick, little bit of how, some quick announcements. St. Louis Poetry Center turned 75 this year, and to mark the occasion, we do have a fresh new look, which I'm sure you guys have seen. While this is a big change, our commitment, of course, to poetry and to the poets in St. Louis remains the same. So we are just very excited and happy to have been around so long and to be celebrating this milestone with you. I do want to give a couple of acknowledgments to some funders, some donors that help make the Hopkins High School Poetry Contest possible each year. Bob Lovis, who is on this broadcast and also is our contest coordinator, is a huge supporter of this contest and is really just the driving energy spirit behind this. And we are very grateful to him for his contributions, both in terms of time, talent, and treasure for this contest. Thank you. We also have Joe Shaper and the St. Clair Historical Museum donated to this contest this year in memory of Tony Reed. So we want to thank all of those supporters for making this contest possible every year. Again, if you're watching this in real time on Facebook Live or on YouTube, we welcome you. If you're watching this later, thanks for being here. Feel free to drop comments in the Facebook Live stream or in the YouTube stream, and let these poets know what you think. Give them some shout outs and some support, because there are some amazing wordsmiths that we've got here that you're going to get to hear. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to Bob Lovis. He is our Hopkins High School Contest Coordinator.
Thank you, Erin. It's an honor once again to coordinate our high school contest, and it's a gift to me. The poems that we receive inspire me to be just as daring and as lyrical and as crafty, as funny, and as honest in my own writing. So I'm always energized by the poems that I see from the high school students. We had almost 90 students in area high schools on both sides of the Mississippi River, as well as both sides of the Merrimack and the Missouri, submit poems to our contest this year. This tally was a little bit less than what we normally receive. And however, given the hardships that the COVID-19 pandemic posed to both students and teachers, I was bracing for far fewer submissions. So what we received in 2021, a very strong flow of entries, it testifies to poetry's vital place in our lives. This art, like other arts, is essential, more essential than masks and hand sanitizer. And besides being essential, poetry is also compelling. Despite duress, despite distress, poets write. And perhaps they write their best work under duress. The poems you're about to hear, in my opinion, rank among the finest that we've showcased in recent years. I want to thank our judge, Marjorie Maddox, for selecting the winners and the honorable mentions from our group of 17 finalists. Marjorie is a professor of English and creative writing at Lock Haven University, and she's the author of 11 collections of poetry, both for adults as well as youth. They include true, false, none of the above, local news from someplace else, and rules of the game baseball poems. If anyone is on board with the mission of the St. Louis Poetry Center to cultivate an audience for poetry and to cultivate poets, it's Marjorie. She's a perfect choice for judge. I'm going to begin by introducing poets whose work received an honorable mention in the contest. Each of them had 2 poems that made it into the finalist circle, which speaks highly of their talent. And so the first honorable mention today goes to Laura Wolf, a student at Central Visual and Performing Arts High School, for her poem, Cicada Funeral.
Thank you, Robert. Cicada Funeral. Cicadas chirped all the time during that odd June when they last emerged onto the world. My brother collected their clumsy live bodies in a mason jar. He showed me the treasure from inside the plastic playground slide, which we'd carved our initials into the underbelly of 2 years prior with a dull pocket knife and jagged lettering. We met their beady red eyes through foggy glass and let them taste our Polar Pop. Some bugs just can't handle their sugar. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Our next honorable mention goes to Rachel Voss, a student at Fort Zumwalt South High School, for her poem, Moonshine Boy.
Hi, thank you. Moonshine Boy. His gaze was sweet, like Laura's apple pie, with ice cream from the Winn-Dixie around the corner. His eyes were green as the mossy pond her father fished in during the sweltering summers. His voice was smooth and drawling, a hymn, like warm honey on her mother's homemade biscuits. His movements were slow, like drizzling rain in the winters, strong as Mason's tugboat in the old shed across the field. His smell was comforting, a tonic, like the scent of the southern hills that swallowed up the town's one-lane road with their massive, lush bodies. His smile was intoxicating, like the moonshine her grandfather used to make, and his lips were as forbidden as her great-uncle's bootlegged rum. But his words were sharp, like the fangs of the water moccasins that slithered through that murky, ancient river water. His anger was impassable, like the summer thunderstorms or the spiteful hurricanes that left her home in shambles. His appearance was like the honeysuckle in Josiah's garden. Her reality was the layer of poisoned weeds beneath the fence, the illegal moonshine she should have never tasted.
Thank you, Rachel. The last honorable mention is Ovia Srihari, a student at Ladue Horton Watkins High School, for her poem, Advice from Your Daily Horoscope.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Ovia, and this is my poem, Advice from Your Daily Horoscope. The moon is in your house tonight. It's paying a special house call just to tell you, get your life together already, would you? Philosophical Jupiter will have you questioning your existence. Your 7th and 11th houses will collide, and you'll meet new people, or old people, or maybe they won't even be people. Introspective Venus will make you see the light. You will most likely trip and fall down a set of steep stairs, Geminis. Sorry, but I don't make the rules. Functioning may or will be hard for all you Capricorns out there when Pluto's unbridled anxiety starts a back alley catfight with brash Mars and starts to signal inevitable doomsday in your 11th house elevated chakra rising sign. It all seems like craziness, I know. Your birthday is speaking to you now. Last night, your shadow started screaming the philosophical divine. The signs are here waiting. Are you ready to read them?
Thank you, Ovia. Our third place winner is Cedric Burgess, a student at St. Louis Priory School. His poem is titled Building Sandcastles, and it's written after the Brian Fanelli poem titled Raking Leaves. Cedric?
Thank you. Building sandcastles. There is something soothing about starting anew on the beach's blank slate, the measured process of scraping out a quarry to gather resources, dumping sand into flimsy plastic buckets, placing them down and watching your empire come to life. Something soothing about the way that lifeless, insubstantial grains slowly coalesce with the splendor of something greater. Standing defiantly against the vast ocean, until you forget the sun's oppressive heat and brutal rays, the sea's corrosive touch, the aching of your body and sand plastered to your skin, until you forget that the realm you tediously labored for will soon crumble and be swept away by a casual wave of nature's hand, stepped on by strangers as an afterthought, and you will have to leave it as the night approaches.
Thank you, Cedric. Our second place winner lost my place here. Hold on. Is Grace Ruo. She's a student at Hazelwood West High School and this year's St. Louis Youth Poet Laureate of 2021. It's an honor bestowed by the nonprofit Herb Arts Organization. So congratulations, Grace.
Thank you so much.
Her poem that she's going to read is titled African in America.
All right. So my first piece is called Identity Crisis. It's after Pages Matum. And when the police decide to kill the boy with two mouths, when my brother is made a martyr on land so foreign it does not even belong to itself, will his motherland remember him? There are no Kikuyu hymns of death by crooked cop, and all the English ones will mispronounce his name, so which side of the ocean will take the boy who is too black for Africans, too African for blacks, but all meaningless in America? The second piece is called Strange Fruit. My father said we should know we are better, as if our family tree didn't share the same roots. African in America is not African American until the night. Red and blue bled over his windshield. He learned his skin spoke louder than his accent. Learned it didn't matter what side of the ocean he was born on when red and blue wished to make strange fruit of him all the same. And this last piece is called On Realizing I Am Black, after Gabriel Ramirez. I was born a shithole country away, brought to the home of the brave and told to behave like I had some culture in me. Parents said African in America is not African American. Said black be a burden, but never mind to bear, so I learned to bare my teeth at mirrors. Girls with skin the same shade of don't belong as they made a mockery of my mother tongue. We made enemies of each other as if our family trees didn't share the same roots. As if America didn't wish to make strange fruits of us, we were lied to. Deceived by sleight of hand, your master magic trick, America, took my sister from our motherland, fed her fables of herself and called it truth, then took my motherland from me, left me looking for my better half and called yourself savior. You lied to me. Made me think black be a burden, like it ain't crossed the ocean to find its better half. I'm black, African in America, everything you dare disregard, and how dare you disregard me? Like I won't come back louder every time I'm silenced, like I can be silenced. I've learned of the lengths you travel to hide me from me, of how these states unite to shatter my image of me. Unlearned everything deception taught me and been made a mirror. No longer will I be a reflection of my loved one's miseducation. These words be proof that truth be louder than the lies I grew up hearing, that blood be thicker than the water used to separate us, and no longer will my truth be diluted. Truth is, I'm so much more than I thought I could be. And ain't that the blessing of this body, the beauty of this skin, the blackest shit you've ever heard? Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. By the way, I wanted to mention that all the poems that you're hearing today are on the website of the St. Louis Poetry Center, and you can see a link there at the bottom of the screen. So they are there to be shared and enjoyed for posterity. Our first place winner is Ovia Srihari, whom you've already heard. And she received our top prize for her poem, Partition, as narrated by an American daughter. And I should point out that there's a visual aspect to her poem that figures into its enjoyment. When you see the printed version, you'll see that Ovia uses slash marks to designate the end of a line. In other words, marking a line break. And so this form of punctuation, which separates the poet's utterances, they figure into the judge's commentary on the poem, which I'm going to share afterwards. So, Ovia?
Thank you again. This is my poem, Partition, as narrated by an American daughter. It all ends here. Trains are passing each other, filling with bodies, uncut flesh, mouths rotting palm and riot police. Every other brown writer writes Pakistan, India, writes mango groves burning, mango mouths filling with blood. Somewhere in Kashmir, a mother is screaming. Writes borders, writes partition. Their pen rips paper, it splits somewhere around the northwestern end. 1947 lives in their blood like America lives in mine. I cannot claim my grandparents' suffering when my tongue no longer bleeds the same color, no longer shapes the same sounds, no longer knows how to speak to them. How do you claim your history when you can't claim your present? How do I tell this story when I know it is not mine to tell, when I could not speak it in my mother tongue if I tried? Partition to me is something I didn't learn about in the history books. Partition to me is the folded up Polaroid of my grandmother, unbent and beautiful in a lush green valley, unshot and unanointed with blood. The ugly truth is that I am a twofold product of colonialism and bad timing. Difference is my motherland clawed and screamed herself free of her chains. My mother's mother bled for this motherland. The irony of breaking chains so a daughter could be born on a new stolen land that creates them. Thank you very much.
And thank you. I'm going to read what our judge wrote. She had complimentary things to say about each poem and I passed those comments on to the poets. Here's what she wrote about Ovia's poem. From the first slash symbol to the last, Ovia Srihari confronts us with the partitions found within definitions, where one meaning / identity / history begins and another ends, but also where, quote, the / and, unquote, narrations blur. This is a poem to both see and hear, the marked line breaks that resemble fences, the layered images. Partition, as narrated by an American daughter, starts at the ending and keeps unfolding until we arrive at the beginning. This is a poem that asks the complicated and difficult questions: whose story is it? Whose story is it to tell? Once again, I want to congratulate all of our poets today for their good work and to thank them for sharing it. And I hope that each one of you continues to nurture your talent and make your voices heard. I'm going to hand it back to Aaron briefly, and then we're going to have a little discussion. And talk amongst ourselves.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you to all of the poets um, who submitted work this year. Thank you to all of the finalists and all of the honorable mentions and the winners of this contest. You folks are inspiring. I love hearing you read your work and also reading it on the page or screen, as it would be sometimes these days. You guys are just so talented, and I hope that you all keep writing and keep expressing yourselves. Your voices are incredible. So I know that I want to thank everybody for watching, whether in real time or later on. And again, feel free to share this with family and friends, and put comments in here to support these writers and celebrate their work. I know that Bob is going to lead a discussion now with the poets with a couple of questions. So we'll kind of close things up with a Q&A. But thank you again to everybody, to all of the poets for joining us and for sharing your work with us.
Well, my first question is, and people can volunteer to answer, where do you write? Do you have a favorite place to write? Do you favor writing with pen and pencil? Do you dictate it into your iPhone? Do you write on a computer? Where do you write? And how?
I mean, I don't have a specific place I write, but I do prefer to type on my computer just because I've tried handwriting poetry, but I tend to get like phrases in my head or words or imagery that I really want to include. And by the time I write that down in a way that's like satisfying to me, I tend to forget the next thing I had to say. So usually typing helps me keep up with myself a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with that sentiment. There are so many little phrases or lines that will pop in my head at random times throughout the day. So oftentimes I'll write bits and pieces of poems in the Notes app on my phone, and then that'll eventually get transferred to a larger document. It's just a way that I can keep track of everything.
Some people.
Same here. Sometimes I'm at work and like a line will pop into my.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm sorry. And a line will pop into my head. I'll either record it in my voice memos or I'll write it down really quick and then I'll get back to it when I get home.
How about, does anybody have a special haunt? I know some people like to write in coffee shops or maybe parks. Anybody have a special haunt where they write? Locker room, maybe at the school.
I know that I get really inspired whenever I go to Lyrical Therapy, which is an event that Herb Arts puts on. It's basically an open mic, but it's really inspiring to hear other poets' work and then create my own work from that.
I don't have like a place that I tend to write, but I have a place that I tend to get ideas. And that for me is usually whenever I'm outside near like a river or near like a forest. For some reason, they just like keep coming and I have to like write them down so fast. And I go home and I have like an overwhelming amount of ideas. So yeah, that's usually how it works for me.
Well, I can see that at work in Moonshine, Boy, because the imagery you have is so fresh and vivid.
Thank you.
That's one of the things that that I admired about it, and that the judge admired. So you ought to keep going back there.
Thank you. I will for sure.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question: what do you think you've learned over the past year about poetry and writing poetry? This past year, where we've had the Black Lives Matter movement coming to the forefront, we've had the pandemic for sure, we've had political turmoil, and that's putting it mildly. And then there are so many other issues that confront us, but it's been a tumultuous year. nevertheless, in the last year or so, what have you learned about poetry and the process of poetry? I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about that.
I've learned that when it comes to writing poetry, like the process is imperfect, which is very, very similar to the process of creating an amazing country like this one, is that it's imperfect and it is very, very chaotic sometimes and frustrating. And so I kind of applied that to my poetry, and I realized, like, if it's not flowing, that's okay. That's usually how you get to a very good end result, is through a lot of adversity. Yeah. It's a very good.
I've learned that there's more to Black poetry than just because a lot of, like you said, last year there was a lot of political turmoil. So a lot of the poetry I read revolved around death. A lot of what I wrote revolved around death. And I had to unlearn that. And the process of unlearning that has been cathartic to but I've learned that there's more, so much more to us than death. And I'm learning to write about that as well.
I mean, I think also just poetry as a tool of like, I don't want to say poetry can make like crazy change and change laws and systemic like structural violence that's existed for centuries, but I think that there is a place for poetry in that, especially now we've realized that it can help us confront our current reality and kind of come to terms with it and recognize it and realize it, but also see moments of joy and see that maybe it's not all, even in turmoil, there are things to celebrate. And also just listening to people's voices. I think poetry also is kind of an avenue for listening to people's voices who have traditionally not been heard before, traditionally not been seen before.
I totally agree with Ovia on that, and that poetry is very much an outlet for a lot of the pain and turmoil that people experience in this country. And it can also be an outlet for healing and giving a voice to people that aren't heard anywhere else other than on the page.
I'd like to chime in, I guess, to agree with all of you that poetry does many things. On one hand, it addresses life head on, and if it has to deal with the death of George Floyd or the history of India and Pakistan, those are subjects that are compel the poet to write. And at the same time, the poetry gives us those ordinary moments or seemingly ordinary moments where you're experiencing the beach or you're looking at a cicada or whatever, and moments of that also never go away. Those moments in our lives that are small but beautiful and thought provoking, and so poetry does a lot, and it's not confined to either or. And I like what everybody's been saying. Yeah. How about people that in the past year or so who've really sort of turned you on? You've read their poetry and they've inspired you to do something similar, or they've given you a boost. Somebody that you've really enjoyed. Can you talk about some of your role models in poetry?
The first person that comes to mind for me is Hanif Abdurraqib. He's one of my favorite poets of all time. I actually met him a couple years ago at the Kenyan Young Writers Workshop. And this past year, I read his debut, The Crown Ain't Worth Much. And he is such an inspiration for me. The way he just has command over his words is so impressive. And he's definitely one of my biggest poetry heroes, I suppose.
I think for me, my biggest like written poetry inspiration is Ocean Vuong. He's a really great role model just because you don't see that many Asian Americans in the literary arts who are very prominent. And I just really loved his style of writing, the way that he really like confronts the Asian American experience through that writing, and just his fiction writing and his poetry almost overlap and share this same kind of like lyrical like structure that I think is really beautiful. And like aside from him, there are a few spoken word poets I really love, Blythe Baird, and then just people from my school and alumni are probably the biggest source of inspiration, which sounds weird to say, but literary magazines and like school anthologies, like seeing their work and their writing is just probably my biggest source of inspiration. I just really love reading it.
Yeah, I've been working on this as being an editor for this creative writing publication for my school, and I have to say, reading the stuff that my classmates and peers have written is probably my biggest inspiration. You know, just because it's nice to have something that's kind of similar and you can relate to in a way, and having classmates, you know, that's probably one of the best ways to relate to a piece of poetry, to know the person who wrote it, you know.
And I should say, Cedric, being an editor, that makes you look at other people's work uh, with sort of a critical eye, not a negative eye, but you're judging it. And I would expect that probably helps you as a writer yourself to be judging other people's work and, you know, seeing something good or seeing where things can be improved. I would think that would be a tremendous experience.
Yeah, definitely. It does help kind of help me see like what things look better in poetry and not. But one thing it also has taught me is that a lot of poetry is kind of subjective, you know. Like there are some things that I thought were like pretty good, but then other people I was working with are like, it's not that good. But so, you know, poetry is kind of, I don't know, maybe different from prose in that way because a lot of it is kind of up to interpretation. And, you know, I guess it makes things like judging poetry competitions more difficult, but it's also kind of what I think is good about, like, good thing about poetry. So.
Anyone else want to respond to that question? I guess we've heard from a number of people. So,
Are we still talking about like our favorite poets?
yeah, other poets that have inspired you or just been a pleasure to read and maybe have rubbed off on you. Yeah.
Okay. I think Robert Frost is probably for me one of my favorites, just because the way that he views the world and the way that he views nature is like so beautiful, and I love seeing that put into words. Like it just really, it's a great way to make your life kind of like a movie. It's so lovely, and I just I don't know, he's the way that he uses his words to create these bright images that are just like so like they feel like they don't feel real, but if you take a look around you, you're like, wow, he's definitely right. These are so real, and this is so cool. And that's probably one of my most influential reads. I think is him for sure.
Well, you can't go wrong reading Robert Frost. He was a person who believed in what he called sentence sounds, that he wanted lines of poetry to sound like people talking. His poetry is very conversational, and yet it's also very, very deep. It seems simple on the surface, but there's such a deep beauty to it. So yeah, he was a great inspiration to me, and still is. Well, Aaron, maybe I should
I
get
love
back to you
Lauren
now.
Hill. Who,
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut somebody off? Grace, were you speaking?
yeah, I was saying that Lauren Hill is one of my favorite poets. Her lyricism is something that I would love to get to that level. But I also love Javon Johnson and Portia Olayiwola. Their stage presence, their ability to captivate an audience is something beautiful and something that I try to emulate with my reads.
Well, all of those are incredible inspiration and mentors for all of you to have. Some of them are new to me. I'll have to go look them up. Some of them I know. We'll maybe post some links in this video a little bit later to some of the work that was mentioned here. So you can, if you're watching from home, you can see some of the inspiration that these young writers take with them. So. Well, thank you again to everyone for being here today, for sharing your words and your work with us, for trusting us with it. We're just very grateful and inspired by all that you are doing. Again, if you want to read the poems, if you're watching this later or watching it in real time, if you want to check out the poems, the link to do that is is below. It's on our Hopkins contest page, and you will be able to find a link to this video and also to all of the winners and honorable mentions and their individual poems. So we hope that you'll take some time to check that out. I do want to give just one last thanks and praise to Bob Lovis, our contest coordinator, for his tireless work year after year, helping to make this contest such a success. I mean, you know, getting to have the honor of reading through all of these poems and getting to know what new talent and new voices are out there as people are, you know, coming of age into becoming poets and writers themselves. And also another thanks to Marjorie Maddox for judging the contest this year. Thank you so much for sitting with the work of these young writers and for your comments and on them. So yeah, I think that will wrap us up for today. We do hope that we will be able to be in person next year for our 2022 Hopkins contest, celebrating with our annual concert again. We will stay tuned about that. If we do, it'll be in the spring of 2022, but we do hope that things will be somewhat more back to normal and we'll be able to be in person again. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us in this virtual setting. And thank you again to all of the wonderful poets for sharing your work with us. Congratulations to the winners. Congratulations to the honorable mentions. We really appreciate all of your work. So, all right. Everyone have a good afternoon, and we will see you later.